Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of UBS Road to the Election, an Election Watch series. I'm really excited to welcome today's guest, former Congressman John Faso, New York U.S. representative from the 115th Congress, representing the 19th Congressional District, just a few miles north of New York City in upstate New York. And so, John, it's really nice to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us.
Nice to be with you, Anthony.
At the end of the day, we know that there are lots of reasons why people go to vote. We hope everybody goes to vote because for an election as the one that's coming up in November in this country, it's imperative that you have to make your voice heard. But there are a lot of issues, I think, also on the ballot. Probably one of the most important ones that we talk about here at UBS, and I think you're talking about with your clients that you're talking to, is the economy. Even in recent polls, ABC News did a poll, and in that survey they said, what's the most important issue for you? By a huge percentage, it was the economy. So what do you think, what is that going to do for voter turnout patterns? Do you think it's going to get people to show up and vote because of their state, of they feel about what's going on in their wallets?
I definitely think it will. In 1992, Bill Clinton had a political consultant of some renown, James Carville, and he posted a sign above the door in every one of their campaign offices saying, "It's the economy, stupid." And I think every election, frankly, is a pocketbook election. Most people are going to go to the polls. They're going to say, hey, what's the direction of the country? Is my family better off than they were a few years ago? Are we looking to the future more optimistically than where we might have been a few years ago? And so pollsters always track the question, do you think the country's heading in the right direction or the wrong direction? And overwhelmingly, it's over 60%, 65% of the people say it's going in the wrong direction. And what also happens, this is going to be a problem for President Biden because he's the incumbent. So whether it's right or wrong, he's going to wear that perception. And the biggest driver, I think, of the people's feelings about the economy is inflation. The prices they see. They go to the grocery store. They see the price of basic staples they need for their family, of meat and vegetables and eggs and bread. They drive past a gas station. They see the price of gasoline. So it's every single day they're reminded of the concern. And if the economy, which you look at forecasters and say, unless you're out trying to buy a house for the first time and you're dealing with mortgage interest rates, unemployment is relatively low. The stock market is doing reasonably well. We've had a big run up in the last year, for instance. So you would think people would say, hey, the economy's getting better. But what always is happening is the public perception is a lagging indicator of the economy. I remember back in '92, George H.W. Bush was running against the perception that we were in a recession. And by the time the election happened, the recession, they later said, the government statisticians, oh, this recession ended back in July. But the public perception by the time they got to the polls in November was very different. So that's the biggest burden for President Biden and his administration right now. And that's why you see them constantly trying to do things to assuage the concern of particular groups, whether they're young people or seniors, whatever. They're trying to convince them, hey, things are getting better and the brighter future is right around the corner. That conflicts with where the public's overall attitude is now. So it's very difficult with that lagging indicator of that public perception to get people to look at it differently.
So that kind of brings us to the next question. As we know, Roe was overturned back in 2022 in June. And so it is an issue that people are either very, they're very passionate about it, no matter which side people seem to be on. And you said, as we said in that poll, it's not the top of the list, but it's on the list. And do you think that it's going to get especially women voters out there to vote for the candidate that supports what they want?
I doubt it, frankly. I think that most people, who are going to use that as a voting issue, have already made up their minds. I don't think that it's going to change a lot of opinion. And when you look at surveys, most people will come out. The question of abortion often depends upon how you ask the question. And when you ask the question of, well, do you think it should be always available, sometimes available, sometimes unavailable, or never available, you find out that people's opinions really have. There's a lot of shades of gray in people's opinions. So they're not all one side on this issue. People are naturally ambivalent often. But I doubt at the end of the day, the question's going to be in 7 or 8 states that are going to decide the election. And starting from the upper Midwest, it's Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, and Nevada. Those are the states that are going to be the most contested. And I doubt maybe in Arizona abortion will be an issue because they've had that issue of the Civil War era statute that was just repealed. But it's hard to say whether that's going to drive and take a predominant role in the mind of the voters, or the small number of undecided voters that we have, as opposed to the economy. And then you have international issues. You never know what can happen. You have the war in Gaza, which is causing divisions, particularly in the Democratic base. That's why when you saw Chuck Schumer a month ago come out and say he thought Netanyahu should leave office in Israel, it was really kind of astonishing. People scratched their heads. Why would he be telling a democratic country, an ally, interfere directly in their election by making a suggestion? Well, the reason was Michigan and Nevada, because you have 2 contested Senate races there where that issue is driving a wedge in the Democratic Party base. So it's foreign policy could wind up becoming an important issue depending on how events take place over the summer.
And by the way, going back to what you said about the swing states, it's hard to not even reiterate this, that it's not even the state itself. Sometimes it goes down to, as you might know from your years being a congressman of the 19th District of New York, sometimes it's about a specific district that can decide which way a state goes. So there's a marginal number of voters that could actually swing the election.
Well, and the other thing is that, former President Trump has not fully consolidated the Republican support. And yes, he's going to get a very strong majority of Republicans. But I noted about 3 weeks ago they had a primary in Pennsylvania, and Nikki Haley had long dropped out of the race, but she still got 150,000 votes. And that's a state where Trump is not really going to be able to forfeit 150,000 votes in the general election. So some of those people would come back to him, I'm sure. But there are many of them that maybe are going to be, I'm not saying they're going to vote for Biden,
right,
but they may sit on their hands and not vote, or not vote in that particular race. So he still has some fence mending to do, and as we know from history, he's not great on fence mending.
For sure, yeah, we can look back at a lot, even back to the Apprentice days, and there's not really a lot of that happening there either. But interestingly, when you think about what those voters might do, you said some of them might sit on their hands, but some of them might go to a third-party candidate, for example, RFK Jr. So now we know no labels, the party that wants to put a president and a vice president from 2 parties in one to make it more moderate. They're officially out. They said they couldn't find a candidate that was going to be able to match up to either one of the 2 men that are in the race. But RFK Jr., does he have a shot to take votes away from either one of Trump or Biden?
Well, right now, I think he's taking votes from both. He kind of appeals to the iconoclastic anti-vaccine sentiment that exists among a lot of the Republican base, and yet he appeals also, because many of his positions are very left of center, to the very progressive people, maybe what I'd call the Sanders wing, the Bernie wing of the Democratic Party. So the question is going to be, how many states does he get on the ballot for? How many states are swing states that he gets on the ballot for? And his goal is going to be to deny either candidate the 270 electoral votes that they need. If he's able to win a state or 2, which I doubt right now, but that could throw the election into the House of Representatives. The other thing to watch is Kennedy's support where it is today. Generally speaking, third-party candidates never maintain that level of support as we get closer to Election Day. This is a little different. It's a little different from Ross Perot back in '92, where he got 19% of the vote. I don't think Bobby Kennedy Jr. is going to get 19%. But here we are as a situation, 70% of the public doesn't want either Biden or Trump to be the nominee, but they're stuck with them. So the question is, does the kind of hold your nose portion of the electorate say, I just can't abide voting for either one of them, throw their vote to a third party candidate, and you have the Green Party candidate out there as well. So it's going to be very interesting watching how this all plays out. But watch those 7 states that I mentioned. And there may be a surprise or two, like a Minnesota or a Virginia, that could possibly be closer than what people are expecting.
Yeah, there were more states in the last election that turned a little bit more purple, like Georgia, for example, kind of flipped blue at the last minute. Obviously, there was some contests that were being looked at there. So that, I think a lot of people are also looking at the quote-unquote purple states there as well.
I think Georgia and North Carolina are more likely to go to the Republican. I think Nevada and maybe Arizona are more likely to go to the Democrat. And I think the key is going to be Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. I think it may come down to those 3 states.
Yeah, which it has in the past come down to those last votes in Pennsylvania. Last thing before we wrap up, I want to ask you about the immigration issue, because I believe that will be on the ballot here as well. How important is that, do you think, in the grand scheme of what we've talked about?
Well, I think massive numbers of people are dissatisfied with how immigration has been handled. And this is the burden is on the incumbent. It's happened on his watch, the degree to which the issue has manifested itself. And I think it's definitely going to play against President Biden in the fall. Maybe it's fallen back in terms of the public perception because other issues have come to the fore. But I think this is still going to be a heavily contested issue. And frankly, for the betterment of the country, we need to solve this. And any controversial issue like this, you got to do on a bipartisan basis. You can't do it one party only. It's got to be a give and take, a compromise in order to bring some rationality, because right now we have no real control of the border and the immigration system, and it's a big problem. It's an economic problem for the country as well, not fixing this.
And partisanship, I think most Americans would say, is at an all-time high. We feel like there's so much divisiveness in the country. It would be nice to see them come together to solve one of these problems or one of these issues. I don't want to call it a problem, but one of these issues that affects human beings before we get even towards a debate. But that's all remains to be seen.
Yeah, it does, and it's a big issue. But as I said, look, we're going to have massive fiscal problems going forward. Our debt and deficits. We're looking at a deficit this year of nearly $2 trillion. The CBO is projecting that we're going to have the next 10 years deficits even higher. We're getting it at I think a dangerous level of debt to GDP, and we're now spending more in interest on the debt than we are in defense. And I think everyone who's looked at this from a sober standpoint says we really need to spend more on defense and we need to spend it smarter. But we have real problems facing us around the world, and we face a threesome of countries, China, Iran, and Russia, that are absolutely inimical to our interests, our national security, and our safety and the safety of our allies. And we're not going to be able to maintain our status as the leading economic, military, and diplomatic power in the world if we're broke. And we've got to fix the entitlement system, and we've got to address this. And right now, neither candidate is really talking about it.
Right. I imagine they're going to have to. I mean, there seems to be a question when it all goes down to the economy and, like you said, our place in the international community. It's important to bring those things up, and I imagine that the debates are going to be really interesting. Congressman, thank you so much.
Thank
Great
you.
stuff. Good to have you. I feel like there were many more questions we could be talking about here, but I'm glad we got to sort of meat and potatoes of I think what's on a lot of voters' minds here. So good to have you here.
Great. Thank you.
Great, Congressman John Faso, former 19th Congressional District. Thank you all for joining us, and please check out our website for more Election Watch content. ubs.com/Election Watch is that site. All the other episodes in this series are there. And of course, other CIO-related election content you can check out. And if you'd like to continue this conversation, make sure you're reaching out to your financial advisor. Until next time, I'm Anthony Pastore. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.